Many people believe that films of the past were better, actors more talented, directors more experienced, and the world a brighter place. Critics often dismiss such views on cinema as nostalgia bias or the grumbling of the elderly. While there is some truth to this, many iconic films from the past would simply be impossible to make today. For instance, Stanley Kubrick, known for his harsh treatment of actors and the hellish conditions he created on set, would likely have lost his job in today's world. He might have even ended up in prison. None of Kubrick's films could be made under modern standards, yet he was a master director with numerous iconic films, whose very names evoke awe and anticipation. The same can be said for films made during those wild times, including the Predator franchise. The first film was shot in harsh conditions. The actors had to endure extreme heat, humidity, and mosquitoes. It was especially tough at night when temperatures dropped and the number of snakes on set dramatically increased. Compare this to the more recent Prince of Persia, where hundreds of people were hired to capture all the snakes and scorpions around the set to prevent any psychological distress for the lead actors. Arnold Schwarzenegger, on the other hand, had to run alongside snakes in freezing cold while covered in dirt and mud. To keep warm, Arnold resorted to alcohol. However, as he later recounted, it only made him drunk, but didn't alleviate the cold, yet he kept working. The actors didn't stay in five-star hotels. They lodged in modest local accommodations where they had to contend with huge cockroaches and questionable water quality. The result? Everyone had diarrhea and spent their nights near the toilet. Would it be possible to make a film like that today? Probably not. The industry has become increasingly polished and artificial. Everyone is carefully protected and pampered, while every aspect of production is supervised by organizations that often seem unnecessary and merely drain the budget. Today, let's talk about the sequel to Schwarzenegger's big hit. Predator 2 failed to recoup its costs at the box office, forcing the franchise to take a completely different direction. In 1987, John McTiernan's $15 million sci-fi action film made $100 million at the box office. Arnold wasn't yet a superstar at the time, so this was a significant achievement for him. It's no surprise that 20th Century Fox immediately wanted a sequel. The script for the sequel was offered to Jim and John Thomas, the writers of the first film. They admitted that while working on the first Predator, they had already considered setting the sequel in the concrete jungle. The writers spent some time deciding who the Predator's new enemy would be. Since having professional soldiers in the middle of a city seemed odd, they considered a retired officer or police officers instead. The studio rushed the writers to get the project started as soon as possible. Arnold Schwarzenegger later strongly criticized this. According to him, the biggest problem with Predator 2 was the rushed production schedule. Initially, the studio wanted Arnold to reprise his lead role. However, he didn't return for several reasons. While it's widely assumed he was busy with Total Recall and Terminator 2, the reality was more complex. The studio originally planned to bring back McTiernan as the director, but the sequel's $20 million budget was too low for him. McTiernan, whose career had soared after Predator and Die Hard, was now too expensive. The studio hired Stephen Hopkins instead, impressed by his work on A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Arnold, dissatisfied with Hopkins's appointment, demanded McTiernan's return. When the studio realized this wasn't feasible, they tried to win Arnold over with money. Ultimately, he declined, citing a dislike for the script and the concept of the concrete jungle. However, his involvement in salary negotiations suggests he might have appeared if offered more. With Arnold out, the studio reduced the budget and changed the setting from New York to Los Angeles. They cast Danny Glover, riding high from Lethal Weapon, to play the lead role of a police officer. The sequel centered on a single victim tested by the Predator. Interestingly, the authors never agreed on the significance of the Predator returning the necklace to the cemetery. Some viewed it as a sign of respect, while others saw it as mockery. The rushed production and numerous rewrites made filming difficult. The studio aimed to shoot and release the film within a year. 2 crews worked simultaneously. Hopkins directed Glover's fight scenes with the Predator, while his assistant shot the subway massacre with Bill Paxton and Maria Conchita Alonso. The latter scene faced issues with the MPAA, which threatened an NC-17 rating. After 20 edits, the film finally secured an R rating. Conflicts between the actors and Hopkins were frequent. Hopkins had little control over the film, and the cast treated him accordingly. For example, once when Ruben Blades was giving an interview for a channel about Hollywood movie production, Stephen Hopkins walked into the frame and rudely told Blades to stop messing around and immediately return to the set. The incident caused a serious scandal, and both Hopkins and Blades spent an entire week apologizing for it on various American TV channels. The media uproar didn't benefit the film, and people started writing it off long before it was released in theaters. The studio was unable to cut costs on Predator 2. Due to frequent script rewrites, delays, and additional filming after test screenings, the final budget of Predator 2 exceeded $35 million. Although Arnold declined to appear in the film, his character was still mentioned in the script. Gary Busey's character was supposed to meet Dutch in a hospital, where he was being treated for radiation sickness caused by the explosion. Later, Dutch was meant to escape FBI custody. However, due to time and budget constraints, the studio chose not to include these scenes in the film. Although Arnold was very unhappy with Predator 2, he still considered returning to the franchise and playing a minor role in Alien vs. Predator. For a long time, there were rumors that his character would appear at the end of Paul Anderson's film. Arnold agreed to participate, but only if he lost the California governor election. As we already know, that didn't happen. Predator 2 was released in November 1990. It may seem silly now, but back then, studios would often release two of their films alongside each other, especially if they had different target audiences. As a result, Predator 2 was released 1 week after Home Alone, another 20th Century Fox film. Naturally, no one expected a small Christmas comedy to be such a huge success, so, overall, the timing for Predator 2 seemed reasonable. However, for several weeks, audiences kept flocking to Home Alone, which eventually became the highest-grossing film of the year in the U.S. Around the same time, Dances with Wolves was released, eventually becoming the third highest-grossing film of the year. Despite the fact that the films had different target audiences that didn't overlap, the proximity to two seemingly minor films that no one expected much from resulted in Predator 2 competing with the two biggest hits of the year. Sylvester Stallone made the same mistake, releasing Rocky V that year. His film sank alongside Predator 2. With a $35 million budget, Predator 2 only grossed $30 million in U.S. theaters. The international release earned it another $26 million, but it was still not enough. That's unfortunate because we could have gotten another unique film. The ending of the second Predator hinted at a third installment. It's hard to imagine what Predator would have looked like in a pirate setting, but the idea remains intriguing. After the film's box office failure, the producers concluded that the Predator franchise was not appealing to viewers as a standalone project. As a result, they acted on the joke made by the creators of Predator 2 and decided to merge the Predator and Alien franchises. Everyone already knows how that story ended. The failure of Predator 2 did not harm anyone's career. Stephen Hopkins even had a chance to become one of the biggest directors in Hollywood. The budgets for his projects allowed for it, but all of his films underperformed. The director's bad luck seemed to reach an almost astronomical level, though it is difficult to blame the quality of his films. Although the second Predator is inferior to the first, it is not as bad as is commonly thought. Additionally, many of the director's other films, such as The Ghost and The Darkness, Blown Away, and Judgment Night, are not bad either. Perhaps the only film whose failure can be attributed to its poor quality is Lost in Space. After a series of failures with all his films, the director shifted to television series. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and stay tuned.